Okay, so Mark, first of all, thank you for coming today. I know you're a busy fella. You're used to climbing on roofs or, crawling around the foundation or whatever the case may be. So let's start with this. How long you been an inspector?
Almost 20 years now.
20 years. So how did you get into the business?
My family was involved in real estate for a number of years. We had done a lot of rehabs on properties. That was kind of a secondary income for us growing up.
Right.
So as a larger family, we were all involved in that whole process, kind of getting the ins and outs and what to do for residential properties.
Gotcha. So kind of like almost the construction side of it, except on the rehab part
That's
of it,
exactly
right? So you got exposed to, basically what you're inspecting at a very young age, right?
Absolutely.
All right, cool. But funny thing for me, my dad was a real estate agent and commercial mortgage broker for almost 50 years. I set my first open house when I was about 5 years old. So kind of same thing, except I'm selling them, he's inspecting them, that type of situation. So, all right, so quickly, just so everybody knows what you got to go through. You want to be a home inspector. So what steps do you have to go through to become a home inspector?
Well, there's a couple different avenues that you can do to take care of that, Mike. One, you can just go to training classes, like whatever your real estate training classes might be. And they can get you from A to Z in regards to doing that training.
Right.
The other way, and that's the shortest route, the other way is actually go through a mentorship program.
Which I'm sounding like you went through.
Yes, that's exactly right. So I was going through the classes, but at the same time I was working with a gentleman who had been in the business for a number of years. A great coach, great advocate for the business. So he taught me a lot of the things that you just can't learn in the books. Right.
Straight
and so
experience.
that's a great experience, great field experience.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's kind of like what we say with when you're looking to get your real estate license, what you're studying there is all about passing the exam. It's not about selling real estate. So it's kind of, I would assume, the same thing, right? Yeah. So getting that, experience from what your remodeling experience and then working through your mentor for a year, for a while doing, inspections. Right. Exactly right. So, okay. So we're going on to contract and we have a buyer who's like going, okay, we need to get inspection. What do? He gets out there, he contacts you. So what would be the first step at that point?
The first step at that point in time, once they contact me, I really just kind of work them through the process.
Right.
What I'm looking for. So for example, when I'm going into the home, I really kind of qualify it this way. There's really 4 broad categories that are covered in inspection. Anything structural I see, any safe issues, any code changes, any general observations.
Okay, so let's stop there for just 1 second. So on pharmaceutical, structural, or any of this other stuff, at least my experience tells me, is that if you see something that is, maybe borderline, for lack of a better term, and I'm using my term, not your term, then you may say, hey, I want you to maybe get another inspection in addition to yours, like a professional engineer or whatever the case may be, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so where I'm going with this is I think a lot of folks don't, when you make those recommendations and inspections, they don't always take note of it.
Correct.
Would that be safe
Correct.
comment? So what I'm getting at, folks, is that when you do your inspection and everything, and Mark goes through it with you, make sure when you get home, read through it, because a lot of times, it's like anything. You hear something the first time and you catch 50% of it or whatever the case may be. So make sure you're reading through it, and then if there's additional questions like, say, should I get a engineer? Call Mark back or email him, and he will say, yeah, you should, or whatever the case may be. But just want us to make sure that you're reading through everything that he's writing, he being Mark or any inspector, writing in there so you understand exactly where they're going with
Absolutely.
So, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Good. No, that's fine. As far as then the next approach, even though we've covered those 4 items, there's really 5 big red flags that we're looking for. What I mean by red flags are items that would have a tendency to cost you the most money.
Okay.
And that would be, foundation movement, roof problems, plumbing problems, electrical and HVAC problems, which is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning.
Okay, so let's stop for a moment and talk about roofs, because that's a lot of times, as an experienced agent anyway, I can walk around home and I can see cracks that are going, that are red flags to me based off of my experience, or I can look at a furnace and go, hey, this thing is 35 years old, and the odds are it's going to have some issues. The one thing we can't tell, especially unless it's just beat to all heck, from the ground level, is the roof.
Correct.
As an agent, or even Mr. and Mrs. Smith type of situation. So, what methods do you go through as far as checking it out, or recommendations you make beyond that type of
Well,
thing?
ideally, we want to try and walk the roof as many times as we can without using any kind of specialized equipment.
Performance like harness, that type of situation.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's going to depend on the pitch of the roof.
Absolutely.
Which for everybody, that means when you see those really steep roofs, okay, you know, the professional roofers, we'll call it the adjusters, they don't go on those things without harnesses, if they're physically going to walk it, right?
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so at that point in time, I'm going to walk the roof. We're going to be checking for vulnerable areas, which would be the valleys, any kind of roof stacks, chimneys, and those types of things.
So that would be potentially where the most likelihood that water might penetrate into the house, right?
Exactly.
Okay, and that could be like they have, you know, either stuff is getting backed up, you know, up to the valley,
Sure.
or bad flashing wasn't done properly, right?
Absolutely.
Or wind has gotten flashing over a period of time, or
Yep.
whatever
Absolutely.
the case may be.
It could be a lot of different scenarios. We just don't really know. Now, there are characteristics of certain types of houses that, you know, immediately when we drive up, based on the experience over the years,
Right.
obviously, I'm going to look at things differently
Right.
based on that experience.
Okay, so elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, for example, you know, a lot of the homes that we have in the metro now, very high pitch roofs, like
Right.
you kind of talked about, and they're very aesthetically pleasing from the road. But roof lines and stuff, when they change, they always create a certain area that might be vulnerable, right?
Okay, right.
So then when we're looking at that house, we're like, okay, I need to check that particular area. It might be a valley, or it might be a front entrance, because we've had times where you've had a front entrance where everything kind of funnels down into that front
Right.
entrance.
Right.
That could be an area of possible concern, something you need to be aware of,
Right.
something that you can address with your agent and with the seller of the property.
Got it. Now, do you happen to use drones at all to look at roofs?
You know, I do not, because a couple different things.
Sure.
One, time constraints. We were just trying to get into a house,
Right.
get the inspection
Sure.
done, get out of the house. That way
Right.
it allows the current homeowners to
Right.
get back to their daily business.
Right.
Drones take a little bit more time. Not
Sure.
saying they're not important.
Understood.
But ideally, walking the roof is going to be the
Be the
best
best thing to
point,
do, something you can
Because
get
I can
on.
get a zoomed in
Right.
picture of it.
Right, got it, from that standpoint. And then, if there is a question on the roof, really what one should do is call let's say two things. One, you could have a qualified roofer, and the reason I say qualified, because there are no licensed roofers in Texas, correct? Although I hear that may be changing
That's
here,
getting
close to changing. And then the other would be to have the seller contact their carrier, meaning their insurance carrier, have them send out an adjuster to look at the roof. Now, you, just so you know, you can also hire your own independent adjuster to come out
Absolutely.
and look at that roof type situation. So, but anyway, just because the roof is kind of at least for me, a lot of times is the one big unknown
Sure.
that you, especially as an agent, they always go, "What's the roof like?" I go, "Yeah, I guess okay. You know, we're gonna have to get it evaluated."
Absolutely.
Type situation.
Yeah.
So, and then I would think after that, foundations, right?
Yeah, we try and do that all at the same time because really the primary focus is if your outside envelope is not tight,
Right.
you know, you're going to have other issues come up.
Right.
So you're checking your foundation, you're checking your roof.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third is basically your windows. So that's your exterior cladding, your
Sure.
exterior envelope. If
Right.
that's not tight, then you're going to have things that you're going to have to address on the inside also.
And would you say that there are certain parts of the Metroplex that you will see, for lack of a better term, more foundation settling than other parts, right?
Absolutely. The Metroplex has basically 5 different topographies that meet in the Metroplex.
In other words, type of soil that they
Yeah,
have, right?
absolutely.
Okay. Right.
So what happens is areas in, let's say, Grand Prairie might move differently than what Keller might or
Right.
Fort Worth. Because once you get farther west of Fort Worth,
Right.
it's a bigger rock base, so
Right.
they're going to have a lot more stable soil.
Right. And
That's something
I've
to
always
say.
heard that Grand Prairie, especially Irving, is kind of like ground zero for I say the worst soils. I'm only referring to as in you really got to watch it with houses on it.
Yeah, really what you're saying is that the water table is a lot higher than what it would in other areas.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's not necessarily the black dirt versus the rock. It's more that the water table.
Correct.
Gotcha. I said, even I learned. I mean, I always heard that, but I didn't know exactly why. Now I do know from that standpoint. So, telltale signs on a foundation that would make you nervous, or for you to say, hey, you need to have a PE come out and take a look at it.
Well, the telltale signs would be, first, initially, any kind of exterior wall movement would
Right.
be the first.
cracks in the brick,
Right,
as they like
right.
to say. Right.
the next thing would be freeze board separation. That's that little transition joint between your roof overhang and
Right.
walls. Okay,
Right.
you'll see a little separation there, and that kind of might indicate some movement.
Good. Well, and at least for me, when I'm showing a house, I call it the ski slope effect. Meaning, if I'm in the home and I feel like I'm dramatically walking uphill or downhill, you know, that's a big sign, so to
Yeah.
speak.
And that's always kind of a variable too. You got to be real careful because some of the older slabs that we have,
Right.
because they didn't have some of the technology we do today.
Right.
So they were always doing most of the floating by hand. So there
Right.
would be variables or low spots in the slab.
Kind of what I think they refer to as a sloppy pour.
That would be
Right?
correct.
Is that correct?
Right.
All right.
Absolutely.
So in other words, you can have in some homes, you can actually feel like you're walking downhill a little bit, but it's really not a big deal, or other homes, it is a big deal,
Yeah,
right? It's
can
case
be.
by case
Yeah,
basis,
case
right?
by case.
You have to get it evaluated.
You
So,
bet.
yeah, so that's one of the things that's important. Like, for example, when I'm showing homes, I always do what I call walk the foundation. And I always teach anybody that I know, to look for those, signs where it's breaking through brick, it's got separation. As you say, the freeze boards are separated. Of course, when it's a lot of siding, you really can't
Yeah.
see that. Outside of the freeze boards being separated, that type
Absolutely.
of thing.
Absolutely.
So, but that is certainly something that, and here's another thing though, you can, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you can have what I refer to as straight line settling cracks on a house because it's a 30-year-old home in North Texas, but that doesn't mean it needs foundation work.
Exactly. Age doesn't mean it's deficient.
Right.
Age just means that it just has different characteristics.
Right, because it's moved and settled down over, and I would say that the construction standards, for lack of a better term, I think they're a lot better at doing that prep work up front and more soil testing when they're building homes on the newer homes, that type of thing.
Definitely the industry's changed and the technology has changed to give us a much more consistent foundation versus a variable foundation, which you have to really do case by case at that point in time.
Understand. All right, so at least for us, typically, we've got roof, we've got foundation, and then I would think you get into mechanical to a great degree, right?
Yeah.
So explain to people what mechanical.
Well, basically, mechanical is your heating and AC units.
Right.
Okay. So really, what we're going to test there, whether it's electrical or gas type powered units, we're going to obviously investigate that. If you're dealing with a gas unit, especially when you get into some of the older units, you're going to have the chances that you might have an issue are greater than if it's.
So we're basically, I think where you're going with that is whether there is a potential crack in the heat exchanger for carbon monoxide.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And so, as a side note, it's really important that you guys put carbon monoxide detectors, and you can get them at Home Depot. Plug them in the walls; they work great. Just go do them and put them throughout your house. Right?
And to make your point valid, make sure that when you install those carbon monoxide detectors, they're not elevated. Generally, we want to try and keep them just a little bit off the ground.
Right. So, like into a plug, from say,
Exactly.
not wired
Not
into
elevated.
the ceiling,
Yeah.
but basically into a plug that would be kind of below your knee or to the floor, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So, one of the challenges, and I tell folks, they go, now, especially with HGTV, they think, first of all, everything in the house can be replaced for $1.99 because that seems to be what they do. But your heating and cooling units, at least my experience for the inside and outside unit, ballpark, somewhere between, $7 to $8 grand, per, if you got 2 units, it'd be times 2, that type of thing, somewhere in that neighborhood. But it's really, and then the seller would come back and go, well, it's working. And in theory, it is working. It just may not be anywhere near the efficiency it was from day one.
Absolutely.
Would that be correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
One of the things you want to kind of think about on that too, as far as when you're talking about costs, you kind of budget when you move into property when your replacement costs are going to be. Roughly, your cost on a heating and air conditioning is going to be somewhere between $1,500 and $1,800 per ton.
Right.
Okay, so if you have a 3-ton unit, obviously just use your multiplier of 3.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting. Most of your one-story homes, it's going to be, unless it's just like a 2,500 square foot footprint, one story, you're going to have a bigger unit, that type of thing. But yeah, excuse me. So, and it's the same thing with water heaters, meaning they can, especially I've seen gas water heaters, I say, in theory, lasting forever.
Sure.
Whether or not they're, putting out good hot water is another story.
Well, their capacity generally is diminished over time. So what it was at one point, a 50-gallon tank is now 35.
Gotcha.
All right. See, so you're heating basically the sediment that's built up in that water heater. You're still getting hot water, but
Right.
you might not have the capacity.
Oh, that's
It's not
interesting.
as
That's
efficient.
interesting. Okay, so what would you say HVAC, if it's a decent brand, would last? What do you think? I mean, back efficiently. I'm sure.
Sure. So the rule of thumb on that, they're gonna last somewhere up to 15 years. After 15 years, efficiency starts to change. So you start kind of getting that point where things start to fall off. You're gonna be recycling a little bit more, those types of
Yeah,
things.
it doesn't mean, again, it's not working.
Absolutely.
It just means it's not working like it did. And I would think too that part of that's going to depend on whether or not you've got radiant barrier up in your attic, because that's really what drives a lot of your heating and cooling is the amount of heat that you have,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So the best thing too, going back to the roof, would make sure that you've got a fair amount of ventilation when the roof gets done, right?
Exactly.
And then maybe some thermostated turbines that will go off
Yeah.
the same thing.
Absolutely. There's a lot of different things you can do to kind of help improve the efficiency of the home. In my house, one of the things that we do is make sure the kids close the door on a regular basis. That helps keep your home more efficient too.
Interesting. You also even see people in their garages, they'll put in their ceiling, they'll put
Sure.
basically a screening, for lack of a better term, to let that heat out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Type of thing. So that's cool. All right. So anything, I would think as far as like household appliances, I think, again, it would really come back down to whether it's, working to not working.
Sure.
I don't know how much the efficiency thing factors
Yeah,
in
we don't
there.
really measure that. It's either it's functioning or not functioning.
Right.
Kind of the rule of thumb that I use is, for example, if I was living in that home, what are my expectations of that home?
Right.
So, for example, if the oven wasn't working,
Right.
and I go home, my wife's going to say, the oven's not working.
Right.
Right? So
Right.
I'm going to take the perspective of if I were to live in this home,
Right.
on a daily basis, what am I looking at? How am I using that? And what kind of concerns, what things do I need to be aware of that
Sure.
might be coming up?
All right, so let's talk plumbing for a second. So what would be your things that you're looking for, or red flags, or things that might jump out at you?
Well, obviously, we talked about some of the older homes.
Right.
There's several neighborhoods that still have the old cast iron
Right.
sewer lines.
Right.
In which, from a visual inspection, you can't really determine that. But what you can determine sometimes is, how quickly things drain out of the house.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
What are some of the other telltale signs in regards to that?
Right.
Do you notice any kind of changes in the soil outside? Is one area more wet than others? Right? Are you in a
Sure.
heavily treed neighborhood?
Right.
That can affect those lines, those sewer lines.
And I would think too, from experience, that if you have an individual who's buying, and again, especially in an older home, they're buying a foreclosure or maybe a flip that's been empty for a while.
Sure.
Any inspector can go in and do it, and then just we'll call it their normal inspection. It may not show anything, but when they're in there for 2, 3, 4 weeks, and as I say, having a load on that stuff
That's
every
exactly
day,
right.
it will rear its head. So in other words, if you've got an older home that especially has been vacant for a while, either because it's been a foreclosure or a flip, you should maybe go get a camera run or
Sure.
do a static test or something like
Yeah.
that, right?
There's
That's
a
an
lot of
extra-
plumbers out there, really good plumbers that will actually scope the lines for a minimal cost.
Right.
So if you're dealing with the older homes that are built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and some of them even 80s, it's always a good recommendation to maybe have those lines scoped. Not an absolute, just a recommendation.
Yeah, and it seems more, at least from my experience, on the vacant homes. Because again, not that the seller of an existing home wouldn't tell you, but at least if you're doing an inspection and you're checking it,
Right.
it's basically what's been going on.
Absolutely.
To a great degree. So the other thing we get a lot of times are code changes. And as I've shared with folks, is you can build a home a year ago, and there can be code changes if you turn around and sell it today, right? Type of thing. So usually what I tell folks is that code changes are things that the building codes have felt would be a better way to go over the years type situation. And it is nothing that the seller has to fix, but you as an inspector have to note it as a defect because you're required to do that by the state. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Basically?
So traditionally how I would word it in a report is based on current code requirements.
Right.
This should be changed.
Right.
But when the home was built, it was this code.
Right, that was the code, the way it
Right.
was, type situation.
Absolutely.
And that could be like, for instance, GFIs. First of all, there was no GFIs, and then it was within X amount of feet of the sink, and then it's within the whole kitchen.
Right.
Then you got to do the outside. So it keeps expanding
That's exactly
over
right.
the years
Exactly
type situation,
right.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and you can still, again, you can have, like with the furnaces, they originally had that little flex piping, and then they said, no, we want a solid pipe.
Exactly.
So, and this is all relatively newer stuff.
Yeah, it is absolutely. And really, what they're trying to focus in on is the safety of the homeowner,
Right.
as much as anything. So if they feel if it's a safety issue,
Right.
then it's going to have more emphasis than if it wasn't a safety issue.
Sure.
So, for example, gas flex lines, like you explained, or GFIs. We
Right.
don't want somebody sticking their hand in a plug and a tub of water at the same time, obviously.
Exactly right. So, and then there are and I know you as an inspector, you have, familiar with pools, but again, there may be instances where you say, if I was you, I'd, get a professional, for lack of a better term, pool company to come out and evaluate it and see, if there's anything else.
Sure,
something like
absolutely. When you have a pool inspected, they have people that actually inspect the shells and they
Right.
can do dye tests on that
Right.
to see if water and dye is being drawn outside of the pool. It's
Right.
a good indicator that there might be a shell leak.
Right. So in other words, yeah. So again, you're pretty much expecting everything, but there are areas where you go, let's get somebody else out here just to kind of take another
Absolutely.
level type situation, right? Okay. Would in some cases when we will be given a copy of we always I say a copy of a disclosure, assuming it fits the criteria. There's certain criteria where they don't have to do it, or potentially a past inspection, or even a engineer / foundation work that was done on a house previously. Is that something that you would want to see, or
Ideally, Mike, what I'd really like to know is just really coming into the property itself, not to have my opinion skewed one way or the other first, okay?
Right.
Every bit of information that you get is important.
Right.
When you're buying the home.
Right.
So everybody's set of eyes are gonna have a different viewpoint.
Right.
That's all good information, whether you're
Right.
talking about, another inspection,
Right.
another professional engineer, all those types
Right.
of things.
Right.
I personally do not like to see those reports ahead of time because I'm trying to
Yeah,
get.
you're trying to get your immediate opinion
Exactly.
and gut of what's going on. You may
Exactly.
look at it afterwards, but
Sure.
but before you're going in, that's not something
Absolutely.
from that standpoint.
Exactly.
Okay, good. All right. Let's see. The buyer. Should they be there the whole time, or should they show up the last 30 or 40 minutes? Because I know you don't want the buyer, for that matter, nor the homeowner, on your shoulder the whole time,
Right.
because that would you can't do your, and then it distracts you too,
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. That's the main point right there. I'm not gonna tell my client what they can do in
Right.
regards to it, because they're paying for the time.
Right.
Right? If they wanna come and they wanna follow, that's fine. However, I try and advise them, if you have somebody following you around,
Right.
have a tendency to wanna ask questions, and questions
Right.
are important.
Right.
But questions generally come at the end,
Right.
after I've fully evaluated the property.
Right.
We don't wanna be distracted, we don't wanna miss
Yeah.
things that are important in regards
Right,
to
because
structure.
and not that just because somebody, it's like any of us, all of a sudden we get distracted and go, holy smoly, I was supposed to do that.
Exactly.
It's same thing happened to me yesterday. I was supposed to call this gentleman back, and I'll be honest, I forgot to do it because something else happened in my world and I got distracted. That
Everybody gets
situation.
distracted once in a while. We try and eliminate those distractions in order to give you a quality inspection.
Yeah, because usually what I've done is I've suggested to the buyer is say, hey, why don't you, talk to the inspector, decide what you want to do. But a lot of times, show up the last 30 or 40 minutes where he's winding down, he can finish this way you're not having to wait around
That's exactly
as long, and then he'll go through everything with you and take the time
Absolutely.
to answer the question. Because one of the things I've shared with people over the years too is that if you don't go to an inspection and you're reading that inspection, at least in my opinion, you may read too much into something or not enough
Sure.
into something.
Absolutely.
Where if you were there and you're going, hey, I think it's a different perspective on it.
It really is. And, there are cases where you're not able to show up as far as the
Sure,
buyer.
because
So-
you have an outstate buyer or
Exactly.
whatever.
So I don't mind going conference call,
Right.
FaceTime, go over the report,
Sure.
and kind of advise them what the overall perspective is.
Right.
These are the things that you want to focus in on. Generally, what I find in most cases, there's really 3 or 4 things that you generally need to focus in on versus the overall punch-out list.
Right.
What I mean by punch-out list are those little things that are going to happen in every home.
Right.
The nicks, the dings,
Right.
the wear
Just-
from
just
kids being around.
living there.
That's that. Yep,
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Right, and then I think it's helpful that you've got a summary page. So in other words, having to fish through everything, you can kind of go to the summary and read for, you know, the items of importance.
Sure.
Well, I say important, at least
Sure.
in perceived importance. Let me
Sure.
put it that way. So.
We definitely want them to read the whole report, but the summary does work.
Absolutely, and that's kind of what, you know, I always tell everybody. I said, look, I said, you know, let's, I know you just went through the inspection. Just let's not talk about it today. Let's talk about it tomorrow. This way, because we'll talk about it fresh in the morning. You can look back through it. I can look back through it, etc., and discuss from there.
Absolutely.
Type of situation. It's always, and this way, if we have to ask questions, we can always call you back and or ask you a question. So. Very informative. All right, give yourself a plug. Give name, email, phone number, etc.
I'm Mark Nation with Cornerstone Inspections. You can reach me at mnation@cornerstoneinspectionsinc.com, or you can call me at the cell at 972-342-0584.
Guys, again, thank you so much. If you have any questions of us, you can always reach me on my cell at 817-845-4030, or our email, which is a little different now, mikemannionkw@gmail.com. I appreciate it. Until next time.